I'm Trevor Phillips. This is Common Ground. In a world of conflict and division, all too many believe that if you're not with us, you must be against us. But does every problem have to be solved by the loudest voices or the biggest armies? Britain says that by 2050, we must, by law, reduce our net greenhouse gas emissions to zero. Tonight, we're asking if we can still afford to reach net zero or whether we can afford not to. For some, cities choking with smog, violent weather events and disappearing coastlines spell the end of humanity. For others, no coal, no oil mean poverty and misery for the world's poor. The Prime Minister talks up electric vehicles and the promise of clean nuclear power. His Chancellor cuts the cost of petrol as the cost of living crisis risks becoming an emergency. The choice is stark. Is it now time to put our commitments to net zero on hold? In the next 60 minutes, two passionate believers come head-to-head in the search for common ground. With me tonight, Mark Littlewood, Director General of the Institute of Economic Affairs, and Sepi Golzari-Munro, Acting Director of the Energy and Climate Intelligence Unit. Start with you, Sepi. Why should we stick with the net zero?
Well, Trevor, net zero honestly really means energy security. It means an unhampered foreign policy. It means national security, and it means cheap and affordable energy bills for the people up and down this country. We've seen recently that gas prices are 5 times what they were a year ago. This is a volatile international market manipulated by hostile states. And actually, net zero offers us the opportunity to have energy security, much more energy sovereignty, and to lower people's bills at the same time while protecting the planet.
OK. Mark, should we stick with net zero or abandon it?
I'd abandon it, not because I'm against a policy of decarbonisation. I'm not a climate denier. And I'm very much in favour of the things that Sepi have said. Energy security, lower bills, all of the rest of it. But I would abandon it because I think it is an overly costly and overly specific target. I think the idea that we can predict that in 28 years' time we need to be at exactly net zero, you know, cutting by 90%, not enough, 100% it's got to be at sort of 1 minute past midnight on the 1st of January 2050 is an extremely attractive policy for politicians who want to grab headlines, but not a sensible policy either for energy or for the environment.
Mark, you could be in here talking to us about all sorts of things. Well, why is this one important to you personally?
It's important to me personally because I think it's probably the most important long-term policy debate of our times. Obviously, what's unfolding in the Ukraine at the moment, important. What's unfolding around Number 10's potential breach of COVID rules, important. But if you wanted to pick one topic which is going to really dominate political debate, always be in the top 3 for the next 20 or 30 years, it's this one. It is important, it is significant, and it's important to get to the bottom of it and understand the trade-offs involved in it. That's why I'm here.
OK, Sepi, and why does it matter to you personally? You've been an academic, you're clever about all sorts of things. Why this one?
Because I love this country. This country actually, by meeting net zero, is not only protecting its natural heritage, its natural landscape, the woodlands, the coastlines, the wildlife. It's actually getting ahead of the economic reality, the global economic reality that net zero is happening. I care about this because not only do I want my children to actually benefit from the natural environment that I've benefited from, but also to really have a strong, prosperous, world-beating economy to look forward to so that they can build their lives on a really strong foundation.
All right, well, look, we start with some agreement that this actually is the most important thing for the next, 30 years, certainly as long as I'm around and about. OK, let me buy that for the moment. Let's start with your case, Sepi. Honestly, today, we've got home energy bills rising. We don't know quite how much, but it'll be tens of percentages. I mean, we could be paying £3,000 a year typically for our energy. We will have to pay a lot of money to deliver net zero. Some people reckon above £1 trillion between now and the middle of the century, up to 1.4 trillion, I think the Office of Budget Responsibility says. We can't afford it, can we? I mean, in our real life, it's a great aim, but surely it's not realistic.
Let's take your points one by one. You're talking about the price hike in energy bills, which is affecting people up and down this country. Everyone wants to have the ability to heat their home and to put food on the table and not to have to make the difficult choices between those two incredibly important things. But unfortunately, our reliance on fossil fuels, it's the gas price that's spiked, that's causing these bills to go up, up, up. So it's really not at all connected to our ambition for net zero, that the energy bills of people up and down this country are going up by 73% in 2 days' time. And by the end of the year, they'll more than double.
You're adding another cost to people who are already having to pay that.
To the contrary, actually, the renewables that are online now are actually shielding households from this gas price to some extent. The renewables that we've been able to roll out in the last decade are actually providing much cheaper electricity into the grid. They've displaced this expensive gas, and so they're actually helping shield us. But if we'd actually rolled out more, if people hadn't been delaying and putting a de facto ban on onshore wind and delaying our progress, then we could have been saving even more money. So we know that the 2013 diktat from David Cameron to cut the green, you can
say the word crap.
Cut the green crap has actually cost households £2.5 billion. The policy to cut energy efficiency programmes not only decimated this growing industry, people lost hundreds of jobs, but has actually cost households £200 extra on their bills.
Well, that's very interesting to hear, but doesn't yet have any public policy implications. If Sepi believes she can provide very cheap energy by setting up a whole load of wind farms or by some new hydrogen technology or by a breakthrough in nuclear fusion or some other weird, wonderful scientific technique that I've not yet conceived of, good luck to her. I will not stand in her way. Let 1,000 flowers bloom, and I'm very open-minded on how we get our energy supply in future. And if there are weird and wonderful and magical ways of doing that cut bills, count me in. But what we're here to discuss, Trevor, is what's the public policy framework for that? Are we going to punish certain forms of energy and reward others? And the carbon net zero agenda is to punish, in my view, with some justification, energy generation that isn't carbon neutral, that has, as an economist would say, an externality. That if you're digging for coal, that might be great, that you can keep people warm, but the problem is you're causing damage to other people. So I've got no qualms at all about lots of new wonderful technologies coming on stream. My question is, what's the public policy framework to bring that about? And are we picking winners and favouring one particular supply over another? And what's the cost of it? And what trade-offs are involved? And I'm very worried about those.
Can I respond to that directly, actually? Because, you talk about magical thinking. I mean, this is happening today. We've got electricity generation from our wind turbines providing electricity at a quarter of the cost of gas. So it's not magical, Mark.
No,
it's happening today. It's happening today, but I'm not sure you really want to see it, because if you wanted to see it, you'd see that actually we've got this incredible resource all around these islands that can bring down bills, can provide national security, mean that we don't have to rely on a Russian game playing for our household economics to actually work out.
So, Sepi, but let me put this to you, though. Even if we did get all of that, you know that we are going to have to go through some kind of transition. We won't be going from, lots of gas and lots of fossil fuels to all wind. There's going to have to be a transition. And in that transition, I think even your own work suggests that there's going to have to be a reliance on fossil fuels, probably gas, the cleanest we can get, but it will still be gas, maybe even new forms, kinds of coal. So you're not actually against the burning of fossil fuels at all. Bear in mind, this is net zero, not zero zero.
Exactly, but you have to look at these things in a different number of different ways. So, for example, we have got these frameworks that by 2035, actually, most electricity generation will be renewables. But, there is, of course, you said the point about net zero, that, we're not saying that all fossil fuels have to go tomorrow. This is about a transition. It's about a transition that we need to happen. People across this country understand they want to protect their natural environment. They want to protect it for future generations. And they want to protect our economy and make sure that we're getting ahead. Whether Mark believes it or not, this is an economic reality. So whether you believe in the science or not, that's beside the point. This is an economic reality. 136 countries around the world have got a net zero target. 19 out of members of the G20 have got a net zero target. This is the new reality. This is what we need to work with if we want a prosperous economy.
Yeah, but what I thought we were here to debate was whether this new reality is a good idea or a bad idea. I agree with you. You've got hundreds of countries signing up to this. I'm sceptical it will happen. I'm not sceptical about the science, by the way. The science that seems to be settled is that greenhouse gases warm the environment, and clearly at some point that has a destructive effect. I think there's more of an open debate on how destructive that effect would be. I'm by no means a denier about it. What I want to get to the bottom of is, can we be so specific in predicting the future that we know here today, sitting in this studio, that the contribution the United Kingdom needs to make to decarbonisation is to get to exactly net zero at exactly 1 minute past midnight on the 1st of January 2050? Are we really able to predict it with that specificity? And targets like we must stop the global temperature rising by more than 1.5 degrees, as if 1.49 is absolutely fine and 1.51 is a disaster. So I'm not sceptical about the science. I'm not sceptical about new forms of energy. I am sceptical about grand central planning targets brought in by governments. I don't think that's the best way to achieve the ends that you and I actually might agree on.
So in summary, basically, you're waving a flag, but you know in your heart of hearts, we'll never get there.
That's completely mistaken. So if you want investors to invest in the industries of the future, in the economy of the future, to create jobs up and down this country, to make sure that the people of this country have a prosperous economy, you need to give market signals. You need to show them that this is actually where the world is going. But frankly, they don't even necessarily need that specific one point. They can open their eyes, and they have done, and they see it happening all across the world. So what I'm saying is, actually, if Mark says we're here to debate whether it's a good idea or a bad idea, but then he says he doesn't dispute the science, I'm not sure how
you've got to get to exactly carbon net zero in the United Kingdom on the 1st of January 2050. The science tells you greenhouse gases warm the environment.
Let me tell you what the science says. The science says that to have a good chance of keeping temperatures well below 2 degrees and to keeping them to 1.5 degrees, which is the internationally agreed ambition, the global economy needs to reach net zero by mid-century. Now, that's slightly different. So with developed countries, we can meet it somewhat sooner. Some countries will meet it somewhat later. It's not as prescriptive Sepi, as Mark is trying to set out.
Sepi, we've just got a few seconds before we go to the break, but I just want to ask you about one other thing. To make this happen, you've got to have public support. To what extent do you think the environmental movement is helping? I mean, at one level, if you read what some people who are on your side of this argument do, they come across as basically hair-shirted zealots. They block roads, they stop us going to work and so on. If this is going to go your way, you're going to have to persuade people in a rather different way, aren't you?
First of all, I'd say there's huge support up and down the country for tackling climate change. People are incredibly concerned about it. It's something we agree on. People want it to be tackled. In fact, it was in the Conservative Party manifesto on the front page that they would put in law net zero in 2019 by 2050. So it's there, people voted for it, and actually people by a ratio of 2 to 1 want the government just to get on and deliver its manifesto commitment.
All right, well, look, I think we've got somewhere. There are no climate deniers in this studio. There will be a transition, but the question is it realistic? We're going to talk more about that in a moment. Stay with us. I'll be testing the ground further, but it already looks like, who knows, we might get to something like common ground at the end of this.
Breached the road. There is a lot of gas being fired all around us. It is an absolute carnival kind of atmosphere out here for Prime Minister Modi's decisive victory. These students are defying the prohibitory orders, and now they're going to be arrested. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. The roads have been inundated. The only way out is to get people by boat. This on any given day would have been bustling with people, but today it's absolutely deserted. I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
I love my job because I get to do something that is contributing to a better future.
This is Common Ground. I'm joined once again by Mark Littlewood, Director General of the Institute of Economic Affairs, and Sepi Golzari-Munro, Acting Director of the Energy and Climate Intelligence Unit. And we're talking about whether the cost of living crisis and concerns about our energy security mean that we should put our legal commitments to a net zero economy on hold. Mark, this isn't just a British issue, is it? I mean, Britain hasn't decided to do this on its own. There's, I think now 150 nations or thereabouts committed to net zero. But the way you talk about it, at the first sign of difficulty, it looked like we bail out. What happened to British leadership?
Well, no, I think you can show leadership on these things. I mean, thank God it isn't only a British issue. There'd be absolutely no point in us getting to carbon net zero if the rest of the world showed no interest whatsoever. I mean, that would be an exercise in preposterous self-flagellation for absolutely no gain at all. So it's only worth doing this in a global context. Greenhouse emissions, global warming, climate change are global problems, and I have no problem with Britain leading on that and pointing it out. And you need to get an agreement of countries across the board. Of course you do. I have no argument with any of that. That is common ground between us. My question is this remotely the right and sensible way of bringing about decarbonisation? And I think it isn't.
I think so.
Well,
Everybody else thinks so. We can't be the only ones who are right.
Well, I'm not sure everybody else does think so. I think this is likely to be a rather contentious issue about not just the rights and wrongs of going for it, but the means by which we try and bring decarbonisation about. And it's on that latter point that I think it's preposterous the way we're tackling this. I mean, I would essentially have one club in my golf set. I would have a carbon tax. And I would say, right, activities that emit carbon and cause damage to the environment, we'll have to price those and you'll face a tax. Activities, some of the not magical new thinking, but weird and wonderful sciences that Sepi was talking about that don't have the same carbon emissions, they will not be taxed. That then brings about a market price. If you're trying to generate energy in a very high carbon way, coal, for example, it will end up being more expensive. And if you're trying to, if you found a way of generating energy in a lower carbon way or a zero carbon way, it will be cheaper. And the market can then do its magic. People will want the Sepi carbon-free energy rather than the Littlewood carbon-intensive energy because mine will be taxed more and the price will be passed down. And that then gives you the flexibility, Trevor. So it's not a perfect analogy, but it's a bit like using interest rates to combat inflation. Now, that's been observed in the breach recently, but the idea is there's a tool and you dial up the price of money if inflation is a problem. And I would see a carbon tax working something like that.
Here we go, Sepi, the invisible hand. Why not?
I mean, let's be honest, people have been talking about a carbon tax for 20, 30 years now, and it just simply hasn't delivered. So by all means, keep working on it, keep trying to make it happen. But in the meantime, let's crack on with what we know works, which is giving investment certainty for companies to invest. You know, we've got, I suppose, let me tell you what I'm most worried about here with Mark's approach, is that by just delaying and dithering and flip-flopping, that we miss out on the economic opportunities, the industrial opportunities offered to us. Now, if we get ahead, if we actually build the industries that we can then, you know, sell to the world, that we can export, that we can bring jobs to this country and bring benefit to this country.
But I'm not standing in the way of anybody creating jobs or investing or building new ways of finding energy. I'm not, you say we should do this, get on and do it. I by no means stand in the way. I look forward to it. Let 1,000 flowers bloom. What I'm focused on is the public policy around it. I don't think there's dithering to say that we should try and find a way of correctly pricing carbon. That's the only sensible policy. The problem is, on the other end, Sepi says she's looking for certainty. You get uncertainty in this market on a practically daily basis. We discover in the spring statement that solar panels are now going to be subsidised and so on and so forth.
Let's stick with your case for a moment. You know, a few moments ago, you were attacking Sepi's case for essentially being a little bit pie in the sky with, you know, uncertain technologies and so on. Now, you're offering the economics, if I remember rightly, in my youth, was once described as voodoo economics. Here is a one club, and it'll magically make everything happen. You don't really believe that, do you?
It won't magically make everything happen because that's beyond the wit of politicians and bureaucrats and campaigners, however well-intentioned.
No, you're bypassing that. Yep. You're saying, let's make it. Let's put the price mechanism in, and that's what will force everybody to do the right thing.
It won't force people, but it will incentivise people in the right way. That's what it will do. It's not magic. It will require brilliant scientists, entrepreneurs, inventors, hard workers, engineers, and all of the rest of it to bring this about. It can't be done just by the Environment Secretary standing up and wishing it to be so. The number of people involved in this and investors and all of the rest, there's a million moving parts. My suggestion of the public policy framework is to try and set the price right. If they focused on that, rather than announcements that we're going to specifically, I don't know, ban the diesel car by 2030, or we're specifically going to subsidise now solar panels in your house, or have a particular £5,000 kickback on a heat pump. Lots of tiny, fiddly interventions that cause confusion and uncertainty on a daily basis. I don't know how you judge where the market's likely to go next. Far better, I say, to stop the dithering and the tiny little interventions, set a price. Certainly at UK level, you'd need to then have agreements with other countries on how we would treat their imports, or whether you'd have mutual recognition, and then let the brilliant people who understand this industry inside out, Sepi will understand it far better than I do. I'm not here as an investor or an expert on the energy industry, I'm here as an economist. That's the best way of getting there, to decarbonisation. And having the humility that we don't yet know at this stage exactly what we want to achieve. Supposing the science starts to indicate that carbon emissions are worse than we initially thought, well, we might need to put the price of carbon up. Supposing, actually, the science starts to unfold, it's not quite as bad as we thought, you could allow the price of carbon to go down. So it's a very simple public policy framework that gives you flexibility with updated and unfolding science. What's not to love?
As I said, by all means, crack on. Keep going, keep working on it, make it work. But in the time that it's going to take Mark and others to actually develop that framework, then agree it with all of the parties that he's just talked about. I mean, you know, goodness knows how far down the line we'll be. But at the moment, what we've got is, by setting a phase-out date for the sale of new petrol and diesel cars, for example, we're now seeing investment in this country, gigafactories being developed in breathing life into our old industrial heartlands, bringing jobs, 6,200 jobs in Sunderland, another few thousand in the port of Blyth. These are coming in order to keep our automotive industry alive and kicking and selling abroad.
Mark, before we end this section, I've got to ask you this. You run a very successful, distinguished think tank, the Institute for Economic Affairs. Can you reassure me, and indeed our viewers, that you're not making this argument, which is essentially no regulations, no pressures on private companies because they're funding you? I mean, I think you get some money from at least one big oil company. Is that right?
Gladly accept money from anyone who's willing to give it to us, but I can assure you that my argument is entirely sincere. You, Trevor, or you, Sepi, might disagree with it, but people give the IEA money because they agree with our approach, not the other way round. And if anybody doubts that, they can try and write me a cheque to say something that isn't free market, and they will see their cheque returned to them by return of post.
Right. OK, well, that's the first time in a long time I've seen anybody on television say, I'll give you your money back. But anyway, just to say that if you're interested in the net zero debate, do make sure you watch Sky's Daily Climate Show, which is on at 8:30, Monday to Friday, here on Sky News. Coming up, we've heard what the guests think and why about their own positions. Next, I want to begin the search for common ground in earnest.
ba ma dalee commencé liggéey bi yokkute bu bari am nañ ko ci.
Welcome back. I'm joined once again by Mark Littlewood, Director General of the Institute of Economic Affairs, and Sepi Golzari-Munro, Acting Director of the Energy and Climate Intelligence Unit. And we're talking about whether the cost of living crisis and concerns about our energy security mean that we should put our commitments to a net zero economy on hold. And we've heard quite a lot about what our guests think and why. Now, here's a big challenge, and it's one that we might struggle to meet. Can we find, if not complete common ground, at least some common understanding between our two? So let me start in a way by challenging both of you, or let me start with you, Sepi. Could there be ways in which we could get to net zero less painfully? For example, does it really have to be 2050, given that we've had COVID, given that we've got a war in Europe and so on? There are pretty good reasons for saying maybe it's time to push this back a bit.
That's only if you're assuming that it's going to cost you more. But as we're showing at the moment, as we're being shown through our energy bills, that actually going for net zero will cut the bills that households are paying. They're going to be paying from 2 days' time. Their energy bills will have gone up 73% in 1 year alone and will more than double by October. So we know that, and we know that that's driven by our dependence on fossil fuels. We know that our sanctions regime, our foreign policy, has been hampered by our dependence on fossil fuels. And so the reality is that this is actually a benefit to us. You know, the question you pose assumes that it's a disbenefit. Actually, it's of benefit to us to act now. And not only that, then even if you take into account, of course, some costs, the reality is that Office for Budget Responsibility actually said that delaying action by 10 years will double the investment you have to make. So it's a no-brainer.
But that's true. But in the same OBR report, I mean, they paint three different scenarios, don't they? Early action, don't do anything, take action later. And yes, it would cost more. But the thing is, even if you took action as you would like now, it's still going to cost you the thick end of $1.5 trillion.
No, I just need to come in on that. They actually said that there's the cost and then there's the benefit. And once you weigh those against one another over the course of 30 years, it comes down significantly to the point where actually the annual cost will be the same amount as we paid for road repairs in 2021.
The question I'm really asking is, do we absolutely need to nail ourselves to a cross-labelled 2050?
The science says that the world globally needs to meet net zero by around mid-century, and that developed economies that have benefited from polluting this world by causing this crisis do have a responsibility to go faster. What I'm saying is we have a responsibility to go faster, but my goodness, don't we benefit from going faster to strengthen our economy, to make sure that we get ahead in the 21st century industries, that then we can be strong in the world, in our economy, and actually benefit ourselves.
I mean, my problem here, and sorry, Trevor, this won't be getting us to common ground, is I don't buy that this is win, 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 all of the way from here to 2050. I'd like us to accept some common ground that there are trade-offs here. I accept there are trade-offs, and they're difficult and they're contestable. I do not believe it will be free to get to carbon net zero by 2050. If it would be, and that's the way the world's moving anyway, we don't need any government interventions. That's just where we'll end up, because wonderful new technologies will come online. We'll choose to do so everybody wants it. It will be cheaper, you're telling us. No public policy needed then. That's just entrepreneurialism at work. I suspect that there are trade-offs, and it will be expensive to get there. And the cost of energy will increase, not decrease. And that there are meaningful considerations there. I mean, we know, for sake of argument, that 20,000 people a year roughly in Britain die of hypothermia. If energy goes up in price and cost, and we've got this heat or eat decision, you'd expect that number to rise. Those are real people here and now. And so I don't buy that it's all win, 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 win. I'm not wishing it away by saying we don't need to do anything about carbon emissions at all. I'm not saying that. I'm saying there are a number of balancing problems, challenges, some opportunities and costs. And we've got to get that balance right, that there isn't a policy which is everybody wins all of the time between now and 2050.
One dimension of the trade-off that you're talking about, Mark, is time, the when, which I've just been asking Sepi about. Another dimension is where, geography. You say, you know, carbon tax, we will make the market will essentially take us in a virtuous direction. Well, of course, the problem is that's never going to be symmetrical. It's symmetrical and uniform everywhere. And while we find our way gradually towards the right balance, the Marshall Islands have sunk beneath the sea. Isn't your proposal or your way of approaching this rather a selfish one?
No, because I think that there's you need to consider not just mitigation. That's what we've been talking about. Let's get to carbon net zero. Let's remove as much CO2 as we can, as fast as we can from the atmosphere. You do need to consider adaptation as well. I think that's another area of public policy. Supposing you knew it wasn't something as dramatic as that, Trevor, but we knew for sake of argument...
No, don't suppose, because that is what it is.
Well, in that case...
What's the adaptation? Everybody moves out of the Marshall Islands.
Well, you compensate the losers at some point, don't you?
You can't compensate people for the fact that their house is 20 foot underwater.
Well, let's suppose that we knew that the only impact of climate change will be 1 million people will be displaced across the world. Let's just take that. I'm not saying that is the case. Let's just assume that was the scale of the problem we were going to be embracing, because their houses would be underwater. Let's assume that's the scale of the problem. Would we be better to exclusively pursue a policy that would mitigate that and ensure that their houses were never under the water? Or would we better to say those people need to be fully compensated, moved to much nicer houses somewhere else, would actually be the better way of dealing with the problem? If we know that flooding is going to increase in the United Kingdom, again, sake of argument, it's hypothetical, I'm not necessarily predicting that, are we better to say here and now we need to do everything we can to stop that and lower the risk? Or is it also worth looking at whether we could, for example, improve our flood defences, such that flooding is more common but doesn't cause as much damage?
Sorry, there are a few points there that we need to unpack. So again, Mark, we need to debunk this myth. He keeps talking about paying more for our energy bills, and people are paying more for their energy bills because of our reliance on fossil fuels.
And we haven't done fracking, and we've stopped the North Sea drilling.
Expensive gas. We haven't stopped the North Sea drilling. The North Sea is a very mature basin. We're pumping as much as we can, essentially, out of it. There's an obligation to get maximum value out of the North Sea, which is what they've been doing. So the reality is he keeps talking about expensive energy and net zero and trying to equate the two. It's unrelated. Expensive energy and fossil fuels are what are related. So we need to just get that back on the table, because Mark keeps trying to bring that back, but the facts on the ground tell us otherwise. The people whose energy bills are skyrocketing in 2 days' time will be able to tell Mark otherwise. Now, in terms of adaptation, the reality is the more the world warms, the more we will, of course, have to adapt. There's some adaptation that we have to do that's already baked in because of the over 1 degree of warming that we're seeing now. The more that we see, the more money we'll have to spend on adapting. And it's just, I mean, we have to address, I know he said the 1 million point just for argument's sake. We're talking about a whole lot more people than that being displaced from their homes, mass migration. You know, there's actually coastal cities in the UK that are already, you know, really losing out. Fairborn, property prices have plummeted because it's already being impacted by rising sea levels.
We're trying to unpack this. I mean, we could do more in the North Sea, and I think the government's likely to take a more liberal attitude there. We've decided not to pursue a shale industry in the United Kingdom for what I consider, from my limited understanding of the sciences, for slightly hysterical reasons. The US has pursued that, has gone for shale. Energy bills in the US, not as big as an issue as they are here, in part because they now have developed a fantastic shale gas industry. We're leaving our stuff in the ground. We've been highly hesitant on nuclear. Now, I have some issues on whether it should be subsidised. I don't really want the state involved, but I think we could have been a lot quicker on bringing small modular nuclear reactors to market. So, in my view, the price is going up. In part, I mean, there's the whole Ukraine issue and there are global economic issues. It's not in the hands of the UK government. But we haven't done a great deal to mitigate that domestically. We've decided, nah, shale gas, we're not going to go for it. The North Sea, we could have done more on. We've been very slow on nuclear. When I said at the outset, let 1,000 flowers bloom, I mean it. And I think there's a good number of flowers that we've got which we're not allowing to bloom, and I would like to see them come to market. That would help cut the costs, even if they aren't carbon-free energy. They might be lower carbon energy.
Let me come back on a few of those points. Fracking. You cannot equate the UK with the US. We've had experts. If you don't believe me, you can look at the experts that have done research on this for the last 4 or 5 years. They tell us that the geology in the UK is just simply not equatable with the US. The US has different geological structures, it's got different geography, and frankly, it's much more commercially viable to frack for shale gas in the US. But the reason actually gas is cheaper in the US is because the US is not physically able to export as much gas as it would like because it doesn't have the infrastructure. And so it's actually in an artificially closed market, which is why its gas is cheaper. We are in an international market. We have nowhere near the supplies to compete with the likes of Russia, Saudi Arabia. They are the people that set the price. Their manipulation or geopolitical game playing sets the price for households in Britain. Pardon?
I'm not predicting, I mean, I'm not enough of a geological expert to know. I'm not predicting that a shale revolution here would be identical to that in the USA. What I am saying is that there are commercial outfits who are interested in exploring this who are being hampered in their efforts by government diktat. And it seems to me, nuclear is another example. We've been so slow on nuclear, it's absolutely unbelievable.
But nuclear is a different issue, so unfortunately...
There are new energy supplies.
Let's let Trevor get a word in.
No, this is your argument.
This is your show.
I want to intervene. I mean, look, there's one thing which clearly does divide you. One is the extent to which the state, government, can make a difference. That's clear. The other, which I want to just explore very briefly few minutes we've got left here in this part, is one about time, really. It still seems to me that you are divided by a sense of urgency, really, in the sense that you're saying, Sepi, that whatever, we've got to do something, whatever we can do right now, right now, right now. Whereas you're saying, Mark, that you think that human ingenuity, the time, the market and so on, will give us the opportunity to solve this before it becomes too problematic. Is that actually a thing that divides you?
Probably caricature both of our positions.
Yeah, I would like to say
that's my job. I'm sitting here with two cartoon characters.
No, so listen, the point actually, no, I would disagree actually with that outline of my position, I'm afraid. Sorry about that. No, I'm not saying right now. You know, I'm talking about government, as governments are wont to do, is to set a policy framework and allow the market to deliver. And essentially, it's not right now. We're talking about, 9 years to phase out the cell.
Now, if you want to achieve what you want to do.
But you need to start now. But it doesn't mean you need to deliver everything today. You need to start now, you need to start now for environmental reasons, but you need to start now for economic reasons in order to make sure our economy is as prosperous
I must give Mark the chance to correct my complete.
No, I'm not
representation of his view.
No. I mean, I suppose it was a fair summary in part. I'm not just saying we can ignore all of this and everything will come right, because I'm sure that there's a great bunch of scientists out there who will crack it all. I'm not as laissez-faire as that. I do think incentives work in the system. But Trevor, you were asking about the trade-off between today and tomorrow, and there's two elements of this that I think are important. One is what economists would call the discount rate. We're not sure where we'll be in 100 years' time. and we value things in the here and now, and I think that's reasonable and rational. And the second thing is, most likely we will be better equipped to deal with problems in the future than we are today or than we were in the past. That's the most likely thing. Don't want to rely on that 100%, but it seems to me that human history suggests that that's something, in broad terms, we can rely on.
All right. Coming up, we've heard from our guests and their views. We'll ask them next whether they see any prospect for common ground, and I'll give my view. Do stay with us.
We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world. If there is a bigger explosion, this area would be in the danger zone. These traffic jams snake for hours up and down this hillside. It means pressures aid, can't access those in need. You can see the depth of the water. If you have a look in front of us, there are people wading through it. I think experiencing the 2 million person march in Hong Kong, that was a moment.
I don't like the Chinese government. It's cruel.
It was real people power in action.
Police have been firing tear gas and rubber bullets.
See fires all around us here, and just one of them is the size of around 31,000 football pitches. Siobhan Robbins, Sky News, Bangkok.
Welcome back. I'm joined once again by Mark Littlewood, Director General of the Institute of Economic Affairs, and Sepi Golzari-Munro, Acting Director of the Energy and Climate Intelligence Unit. We're talking about whether the cost of living crisis and concerns about our energy security mean that we should put our commitments to a net zero economy on hold. Well, we're coming to the end now, so I'm going to give each of you 1 minute to tell me what you feel you might have learned from our conversation, and if anything that you've heard has actually changed your mind about the other's view. You don't have to, but if you do, Sepi, why don't you start?
Well, I think I've learned that Mark's approach wouldn't actually address the cost of living crisis that people are facing because of skyrocketing gas prices, the dependence on fossil fuels. I think I've also learned that actually we will still be subject to the whims of hostile nations such as Russia, because we're hampered in our foreign policy. We can't put sanctions on the Russian energy sector because the West is so dependent on their fossil fuels. So I think I've learned that actually we won't really make a difference to households today, and it won't help get us the investment that we need in order to strengthen our economy. And
had anything you said changed your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I very much agree with Mark about the nuclear issue. Unfortunately, the past few decades, successive governments have seen that, you know, to be dithering and delaying, but that's partly because nuclear is so expensive.
Mark?
Got some common ground here. I haven't solved the problem of energy security, haven't tried to, and I haven't solved the cost of living crisis. I don't think either sticking to or abandoning carbon net zero will have any impact on the cost of living today. That requires other measures. I think there is some common ground here, actually, and I'll doff my cap to Sepi in a way. She's quite optimistic. Usually when I'm involved in this debate, I'm involved with people over the other side of the table who are saying that if we don't do exactly what they're saying exactly now, Armageddon is a certainty, sort of by Thursday next week. Not in Sepi's case. I think she sees that it's going to be invention and entrepreneurialism and innovation that solves these problems, and there is common ground between you and I on that point. There does need to be a public policy framework. There's agreement between you and I on that point. However, I'm more optimistic than you. I think we can get a simpler, better public policy framework than the highly suboptimal, interventionist, fiddly one we have at the moment. So some common ground.
All right, well, look, this has been very fascinating. I mean, obviously, I kind of expected that the two of you would disagree about the extent to which policy could make a huge difference, and you're more optimistic about that. You're less optimistic about that. I think it is clear that whether either of you likes it or not, you do have a slight leaning in different ways about what matters and a sense of urgency. And I accept, you know, you're not crazy, you've got to do things today, and you're not crazy, leave it till forever. But you do have different leanings. Well, what does strike me is that I think there is some common ground here. You both clearly believe that science has a role to play, and you both actually do believe that policy can actually make a difference. So here I've got a proposal. You got a think tank? You got a think tank? Why not bring them together? I think the optimistic, the possible pro-science think tank that could help solve this problem for humanity. I think we've got an answer here. Thank you both very much indeed. That is it from us for this week. Next week, we'll be joined by two more passionate advocates in the search for common ground. Join us then.